Welcome to another episode of Silver Lining for Learning. And you see the host. We have Chris Didi from Harvard, Shuangye Chen from East China Normal University, Punya Mishra from Arizona State University, Kurt Bunk from Indiana University, and I'm Yong Zhao from University of Kansas and the Melbourne Graduate School of Education in Australia, which I have not been able to make it out there. And it is a good time for us to think, because we've been hosting different episodes, we've been hosting different guests. But again, I want to emphasize that when we started this show, we also want to share our own ideas. In many ways, ourselves, we've been professors, we've been researchers, we've been writing about education, educational technology, and educational policies, and in different countries, in different places. So we want to have a chance to reflect on what we think about previous episodes, what we think the future might be, but also our own opinions about the silver lining. But today I want to start by saying something not so silver lining. I am at University of Kansas. Many of you might have seen the news that the KBOR, I think the Kansas State Board, basically said all universities in Kansas, in the state of Kansas, can in essence fire people, including tenured people, within next 2 years. And most of the universities have came up with statements to reject that, but University of Kansas has not completely rejected it. But yesterday, a message came out to say we'll make a decision in November. That's my reading of the message. So it is getting a lot of angry people because tenure used to be or has been considered a big privilege for universities, and even though people think that's the way to protect academic freedom, so the administration cannot fire people easily. It's been a tradition in many ways, but this is a big challenge to the faculty. I'm not sure how things will come out. Of course, the reason is that COVID-19 has reduced university incomes, has reduced state incomes, and necessarily, there's financial issues. So I was just wondering about, we have so many professors.
I did read the news items now, and I was just curious. I mean, is this coming from a economic perspective, or is it coming from one of those cultural war perspectives that universities are bastions of liberal blah blah blah? So tenured radicals, that's a book out there, right? I mean, so and is the economic one an opportunity to use that to use the economic crisis or whatever is
right
emerging?
Now it's coming out as economic reason, but who knows, there may be other reasons. There's a lot of people who are against tenure anyway. This is a big change, and so it could be with other forces, but at this time it came out more like financial reasons. So I was just wondering, that was just more of a thought about, it's touching the cornerstone of higher education in many ways. I was just wondering if anybody else has any reaction to that or something like that. It's to say how existing norms have been challenged and how new possibilities are emerging.
Well, so just a couple of quick thoughts. So one is like Johns Hopkins, for instance, their College of Education, at least that I know, doesn't have the tenure. They don't have tenured faculty there, right? And so it's not that there don't exist universities which don't have that the tenure system. The other thing is that the pressure against tenure was growing for a long time. I mean, so it's not new as an idea per se, for a variety of reasons. I mean, some political, some otherwise. I mean, you can hear those noises even within academia, that there are faculty members, once they get tenure, they don't do anything, blah, 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 which is, I know we will all know of instances of people like that, who shall remain nameless, but we know those. So I think there's pressure from that end as well. Of course, there's the economic pressure. And one of the things that if you look at anytime there is some kind of a disaster or some kind of a catastrophe or something like the pandemic or so on, what basically appears to happen is the advantaged get more advantages and the disadvantaged get worse off. I mean, we know that. The other thing that happens, the trends that have been continuing coming from before just become stronger. And so I think one of the trends, for instance, the remote working, remote learning, online is going to get stronger. And it was always waiting for it to tip over. I think this is in some ways, yes, it is the nature of learning is going to be different. And I think tenure may be one of those things, which was already sort of the groundswell or the movement was already beginning. And this is going to be one which, pushes it over the extreme. I think something that you and Chris were talking about before the show started, which is, I think there are going to be a lot of educational institutions which were teetering in terms of economic viability. I think many of them are going to fall off the cliff. You're going to see a lot more organizations combine because bigger in this sense may be better because bigger is harder to fail. So I think we are going to see trends which are already occurring just speed up. It's not that I don't think that there will be anything sort of super brand new emerge, but it will be things that had already been under the ground, had been picking up force, had been picking up momentum, will just go stronger. That would be my sort of first sort of read on this.
Well, institutions will die. I mean, we know COVID is going to end a lot of different institutions, a lot of norms. I was just wondering, Chris, what do you think? Just let's talk about institutions come and go. And some new ones will pop up, will be better. Some, bad ones will end, and some good ones might end as well. What's your thoughts, Chris?
Well, let me step back and put this in a broader framework of invisible walls. So Lynn McKay, who is a former superintendent, an educational leadership consultant, a regular participant in our YouTube channel, and I did some work with a school district in New York a couple weeks ago, meeting with teachers on the leadership team, administrators on the leadership team, talking about different kinds of innovations in K-12 education. And one of the ways we framed it is to talk about invisible walls, that you constrain your thinking and you don't even know you're there. It's like a fish not knowing about water until you're outside the water. And then all of a sudden you see all the walls. So for example, I've been over the decades on a lot of brainstorming groups for reforming K-12 education. And sooner or later in every group, somebody would say, well, we can't do that because schools are custodial institutions. They're places that parents send the kids to keep them safe. Well, guess what? That role, which is a very useful role, has been undercut by the pandemic in ways that may not be true for a long time. That invisible wall has eroded. Harvard would say it's the magic campus. Anybody who wants a degree from Harvard had better show up here because the magic campus is the secret sauce that one of the secret sauces that Harvard puts on things. Well, guess what? Now Harvard is awarding all sorts of degrees to people who will never come within 2,000 miles of Cambridge, Massachusetts. An invisible wall disappeared. And I think that tenure is another one of those invisible walls. And one of the things that bothers me about tenure is somewhat different than what we've been talking about. And that is that people can retire on the job. And even if they don't retire, even if they work hard to earn their money, they may bring a set of ideas and knowledge that's no longer current. And we see that in politics with 88-year-old senators and, an old president and an old head of the House of Representatives. I feel as if my career must just be starting in my early 70s because I look at all the leaders and they're older than I am. That's not good, right? That's not good. So I think that one framework that I try to look at these things through is the invisible walls framework. And one of the invisible walls that tenure creates is that somebody can stay on past their usefulness. And maybe it's a good thing that now we move beyond that, understanding that there are other kinds of protections that might be valuable that disappear with it.
So I was just wondering about invisible walls, about various kind of things. I just want to bring Shuangye. You're in China. China has a very different kind of context of COVID-19. They were very successful. They had many different changes. But do you see any institutional changes in China?
Yeah, thanks for your question. I think this is a kind of question puzzled me or going with me through the Silver Lining program. Yeah, because when we started the Silver Lining program, I got that question. I think this is a time for crisis, but also for big change. How can we rethink education, especially as kind of a disruptive opportunity for education, especially in China. However, in China, I can see almost that there is no institutional changes, especially no big institutional changes. Like in America, I can see that the SAT the SAT 2 test was canceled. But in China, our national university entrance examination went very well, as usual, as normal as usual. And all the other things, I don't see any disruptive changes in our institution. And we can see only the 30% financial cuts of the university finance, and some drop of the applicants to American universities, some rise of application to British universities. And that's more on this kind of on the surface, more phenomenon. But I don't see, especially in education, there is any institutional changes. So there is also my puzzle. Yeah, what would be a kind of consequence in the long run? That is, if we hold there is a two sides of the world. One side is have such a kind of a significant changes, disrupting the old institutions we are very used to, but on the other side, they still keep as normal as usual. So what would there happen? Kind of more drastic imbalance, or a kind of a more visible wars? I don't know.
Well, Shuangye, Kurt, I'll come to you, but there's one thing I just want to bring out in China. So I've been reading a lot about this. You know, all these international students, since Pune you mentioned, who are supposed to be taking courses in US universities or in UK universities, Australian universities, but many of them are stuck in China. So many of them are taking these online courses, but because of time zone differences, so they have formed almost like nighttime studying with US universities. Is that true?
Yes, it's true. Yeah, and also some students were based in some Chinese universities. Yeah, so they have also kind of a very short time joint program, like for Capital Normal University, they have such kind of capital a program that has half of the credits from the online courses from the original universities, but half of the credit from the offline courses provided by Capital Normal University. And those universities in America would credit, they would recognize this offline courses.
So, which means American universities have changed. So they began to acknowledge Chinese university credits as their credits, which is really funny. US never used to do that. So that's funny. But anyways, let me just go ahead, Shuangye.
Yeah, a little bit different. This they would open new courses and hire new people for this special program, not from the regular Chinese university courses. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So let me get to Kurt. Kurt, you have any response initially? That just got to me about all these changes. So today, I know we have others to reflect on, but this change, institutional change, just gets to me to think about this. From especially last week, Rover's interview went quite inspiring for me. Go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, and roaming the halls at the same time that Rovi was at Indiana University was your provost at Kansas now. One of my colleagues has moved to become, I wonder if she's, her name is Barbara Bickelmeyer. So if you run into that name somewhere, she might be the one. No, I hope she's not.
Well, she worked with you guys at Indiana, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. I'm a close colleague of hers. I'm various things. I put on my former CPA accountant hat, and I think about, as Punya said, I wrote down those words, nothing new, right before you said that, nothing new. Every budgetary crisis that we run into, which happens every 7 years in the university setting, approximately, maybe more soon, maybe more often recently, but every 7 years we hit a crisis, and the chips start toppling. They start cutting, they start snipping. The chisels come out every time. And what are they going to chisel at? Well, in this case, they're going to chisel at tenure, perhaps. But to be honest, given the significance of the pandemic, given the significance of the work at home lifestyle, given the significance of the international students that have decided to stay home for a bit, given the significance of parents having to, homeschool kids, all these different factors, you would have thought that there'd be a lot more commotion, chaos, confusion than what has happened. You would have thought that we'd have a lot more retrenchments, a lot more give backs, and we'd just be apologizing. Oh yes, take this back. Oh, cut my salary. Oh, put me on furlough. Without a blink or a wink, we would just be accepting of it because this is so serious right now. I think we would actually be giving up a lot more than we have. And so when I think about what we've survived so far, and my university's done a pretty decent job of this. We're getting COVID tested every week right now, but our medical school, the plan that we put in place, the hybridization of learning, the multiple paths that they've come up with, you kind of wonder, why didn't this happen a decade ago? I mean, in my handbook of blended learning, I pointed out the rescheduling that's going to occur, and this came out in 2005. Those rescheduling ideas and whatnot are starting to happen. And we're not giving back, at least to the degree that I expected yet, but it could happen. And so this morning I had Marcy Driscoll in my class come in from Florida State, the former dean at Florida State. Marcy, she's now retired, and she talked about some of the retrenchments that, or thought about, such as outsourcing course development in this online learning age. Many universities like Harvard are using 2U, and now they've rethought that. Some universities have made these snap judgments that we can get outside experts to increase our enrollments or to design our courses. And then they see the implications thereof and the less control that they have. And maybe it's not such a good thing after all. But what I'm worried about is the young people. As Chris is pointing out, it's if we do have even just slight cutbacks, the old experienced faculty are going to be pushing to keep their jobs and to not make the cuts of changes to tenure and so on. And so what's going to happen will be fewer positions. A lot of 88-year-old senators turned faculty, and 100-year-old faculty and whatnot. Like Rovi's idea of a 60-year curriculum would be the 60-year faculty member. And I started wondering about the new blood that we need, the young people that we need to push the field forward, to push the discipline a bit, and to come up with the creative ideas and the creative insights, the creative research that we need. And so that maybe has got me the most worried when I see my people who are very ambitious, very accomplished, very talented, having difficulty finding positions of impact. They can find positions, but finding positions of impact, it's got me concerned, to be honest. It's the young people that has me the most concerned in this environment right now.
Well, there's when things are collapsing, there are new things popping up. So I just was wondering, I'm going to throw out one thing. I was reading this news about Google coming up with something, like they call it career path, like credits. You can get a certificate from Google, and they have collaborated with many institutions, and that certificate will get you a job, pays like $70,000, and it's basically like a college degree. There are new possibilities popping up. And I don't know, are there any other things you see popping up that's giving the youth, our children, a chance to escape, to try something different? Anybody?
Well, let me reframe that one a little too. Another thing that Lynn and I did with the school district is something that came out of a group at Harvard called Project Zero. And it's a little exercise called I used to think, but now I think. And it's very evocative, really, to get people to do that, especially when you can say, before last March, I used to think, but now I think. So I was thinking about today's program and what I used to think, but now I think might be related to silver lining for learning. And I'll just try that. And then if any of the rest of you feel like doing the exercise, you can jump in or we can move on. But I used to think that the way to keep up with what was happening in EdTech across the world was to, scan articles, look at conferences of different kinds and see who was presenting at the conferences. But now I think that some of the most interesting stuff is being done by people who are never going to write an article and they're never going to go to a conference because they're just on the ground making it happen. And that's why I think we've been able to come up with so many interesting things to keep silver lining for learning going. So it's changed my view of how I keep up with knowledge in the field.
I'm reminded of our conversation with Kiran and Akash, where Zhao made the point that you created the schools without actually having read a single journal article, though they sort of balked at like the extreme nature of that comment. But I think Chris, the point you're making, I think is a good one, in the sense that the real innovation and so on. And I think of so many different multi-million-dollar NSF projects to create this. I do remember CoViz, which was such a big thing, collaborative, great ideas. I'm not saying they are not great ideas, but for them to have traction beyond the study and that grant timeline, it just never happened, And what does happen, if you think about the tools that we all ended up using, as we are doing now, are these more generic tools, whether it's Google, whether it's Zoom, whether it's we never went and used CoViz or some of these NSF developed, or whoever Department of Ed developed projects on collaboration or how scientific this can happen or that can happen. So I think there is something to be learned there as well, that it will be these more generic tools which will get co-opted by educators and so on. And then we will build wraparound around it. We will build techniques. I've seen some really amazing, engaging, interactive things that teachers and educators are doing just with Zoom to get students to communicate with each other, to express themselves, taking advantage of even the limitation, excuse me, limitations of the medium, but in very creative ways. So that's, I think, the other piece here, I think, that really comes through, which is that if we have to think in terms of policy of what kinds of technologies we have to support, it really is building capacity in people rather than in the tools, because the tools are out there and people will pick and choose whichever one they want, whatever purpose they have. And it's really the capacity building of institutions, of individuals, of organizations that we need to be focusing on. Because one thing that stood out, if you think about a lot of our guests who have come forward, and I think Kiran said that same thing too, is like, and I think this was like Sean Lesher talked about it, one of the early episodes, that our organization was already ready for COVID. We just didn't know that it was COVID, but we had created organizations where people had agency, people had ownership, where there was this continuous care for the learner, and that come what may, we will figure a way out, and we can pivot and we can change. And to me, that has been one of the biggest lessons from Silver Lining, is that we have to build better, more resilient organizations. And that means capacity building in individuals, but also these networks and structures which can evolve and change depending on the need. I think that's a really, really important thing. And if I can add one more thing, because Scott McLeod, who was one of our original members starting this, had a recent blog post where he makes this contrast between crisis management and reform-oriented leadership. And he said that that K-12 schools are going to go back to pretty much being the same, because this was seen as being crisis management, which is a very different mindset from actual reform. And the ones who were into reform, guess what? They will come out of it stronger in their conviction. Those who were for the status quo, they will see this as, oh my God, look at what happened during COVID. This was such a disaster for our teachers and our learners and so on. So we should go back to the safe and tried ways, even though we know they're not perfect. And that's, I think, is what it's going to be. I think we're going to see the split, which always there. I think that split is just going to get stronger, between people who see the value of making these changes and creating organizations which can pivot and which can take advantage of whatever is happening, see the silver lining, and others who will just say, this was not good, let's just go back to what it was before.
Let me jump in. I will invite Shuangye and Kurt to come in. Because what Chris said and what Punya said is something really interesting to me. I used to think, now I think. I've met many innovative practitioners, school leaders. Most of them started not because they've read a good education research article or a good education book. Most of them started because they don't like what they were doing. So, but they can be a teacher, they can be a principal. They just started, and then they began to seek advice from the establishment. It's kind of, they were innovator. Then they say, oh, I got to speak in the language to hang out with the establishment. So they kind of moved the other direction. It's really interesting. So my question, Rennie, to Shuangye, you are the executive editor of a big journal. So when you're publishing all those articles, how do you think, who reads them? Who should be reading them? That's so what are you thinking? You of course want people to read them,
Yeah, we are not a very big journal, but we are kind of a new rising journal. Actually, this is also a question to myself, that is this a list have to be positioned as the academic journal. So as we all know, that is, if it's an academic journal and the race, that the people, the readership audience will be very limited. Yeah, even there is a joke, there is maybe just 3 or 4 people really read your articles from the submission to publication. So what I thought, that is this ECNU Review of Education would like to have this kind of a more inviting mode. That is inviting, that is, we have this kind of regular research articles, but we also have other columns like voices, and the Silver Lining for Learning report, we would like to have a shorter and more practitioner or even policymakers, participants, invite their voices in our journal. And we would also do a kind of extension and to how to say, we have this kind of knowledge transfer from the article to a kind of a more public readable version, like we would promote article to news journal like Financial Times, Conversation. So we promote this kind of a knowledge transfer that make our academic ideas to be more accessible and beneficial to the public. Yeah.
There's I don't know if you're aware. There's an author, an education researcher, who recently created something called the Kardashian list of education scholars, and I think I was one of the Kardashians. And
Yeah, you were on there, Zhao.
His argument was that there's a group of people, people like to listen to them, and then they're just basically tweeting, doing stuff. Actually, I don't tweet a lot, but anyway, I was just wondering, I'm sure every one of us is a Kardashian in our own little circles in many ways. People say, oh yeah, those guys, was just curious about Kurt. The reason I'm asking this is we all write stuff, we all write. But then the innovators, I see that they don't read. Maybe that's the context. So that's why we are doing Silver Lining for Learning. I think it's really meaningful. I'm enjoying this a lot. So Kurt, you've written quite a lot. What was your do you have a practical person you have influenced because of your writing who has started something new? I don't want to make you feel bad, Kurt. You might have. I'm just curious about that, You're on mute.
Can you repeat the question? Are you saying, have I influenced someone who started a new enterprise? Has someone started a new enterprise?
Yes. You've written a lot. Have you had good evidence that somebody followed your book and started something new?
Yeah, all the time I get notes from folks, and there's various footprints that one has, and so it's not just from one book or one article or one project or one course. I will say that those inspirational notes that one gets, you can take a look at my website and go to the testimonials. I save them with the institution where I got those from. So yeah, and it sometimes goes in streaks. In all life, sometimes it's the up and down when you feel like you haven't made an impact, and all of a sudden you get a bunch of those things. I'll try and keep things, because I'll get some more specific example. But I was thinking about Chris and what he had to say, how I've reflected on my own growth or my own interpretation. And yesterday we had our student qualifying exams, which in ours, we have a dossier process, 1, 2, 3. And number 2, the student has to defend in front of all the faculty. And I was one of the reviewers, all the faculty and all the students. And in her candidate statement, she says, as a social constructivist, as a scholar, this research will turn, automatically get into practice, kind of like assuming it would make an immediate impact on people. And so, I had to reflect back at my, getting my first job in academia and taking the White Knuckle Express to Morgantown, West Virginia, and getting off the plane, and Rogers McAvoy picks me up and he says to me, I'm a Skinnerian Rogerian. And I said, well, what's that? And he had explained it to me, but I go to the department and I explain I'm a social constructivist, just like my student was saying yesterday. And little did I know, we had B.F. Skinner's daughter in the department and her husband, and they tried not getting me hired. They didn't think cognitive psychology, they thought it was a fiction and not a useful fiction. And when I got to department meetings, there was endless battles. That the Capitol, what happened on the Capitol had nothing. The West Virginia University had more severe battles in our faculty meetings in the ed psych department. And when I got to Indiana, the instructivists and the constructivists were fighting. The whole language people are fighting the basic skills people in language ed. I'm just tired of the battles. You know, my reflection is I'm just tired. 30 years, more than 35 years of seeing this, and for what? You know, for what? Do we need to use the lingo that turn people off? Do we need to say, I'm a scholar? You know, what kind of scholar? I mean, I'm a social constructivist. No, you are a person who uses social constructivist methodologies to understand your research. No one is a social constructivist. You don't believe social constructivism. You know, and so my insight is that we are all trying to help education in some way, shape, or form. And if we're all, I like to think we're learning environment designers, engineers, or something, but we got to give up the theory, the theoretical lingo and baggage that we, you know, just promote constantly to win a battle, to win the next grant, to make our discipline, maybe it's learning science, seem better than ed psych, seem better than ed tech. That's going to serve no purpose in the long run. And so, you know, we have to think about the people, the students, the adults who are going to benefit from the work that we're doing and stop the battles. And that's what I say in the last chapter of My World is Open Book. So when you ask me where I hope my work has an impact, I would hope that people read the last chapter and what I predict towards the future and about the battles that we're fighting in terms of all the theoretical jargon, because that's not going to change schools anytime soon, from my humble opinion. That's my insight that I've got during this COVID.
Well, that's very nice, because I think people on this, at least this panel, Chris, Shangyi, Punya, and Kurt, and, you know, Scott McLeod, I think we are, the reason we're doing this, one of them is to try to bring some help to the field. I mean, to practice, I think that this is something really important. So I want to invite all of you guys to think a little bit about what did you learn? You know, again, that's a big question. It's like ask a kid, what did you learn today in school? But really, like this is more like a follow-up on Chris, that kind of thing. How did we change? It's almost been a year now, I think, and what changed? I can tell you how I have changed. I have been stuck in my house for almost a year, really almost a year now. That's about another 3 weeks, I'll be a year. I think I reflect almost every day on how meaningful are my presentations. I really actually ask that, because, you know, every day you are, every week you're doing something with other people. So now I spend time really asking people, did that make any sense to you? Because I'm at home, I'm making this up, I'm reading a lot, I'm reflecting, I'm thinking a lot. I think that's a big question. So I'm becoming more and more aware of my messages and what I do. And this silver lining, of course, is a great opportunity to learn about this. And another thing is that, you know, through silver lining, I think I'm also learning to think about how we expand our show based on what, you know, Chris was really talking about. A lot of innovations are happening. We are featuring a lot, but again, question is, how come more people are not doing that? So this is why I started today to say, well, there will be collapsing of institutions. There will be new institutions popping up. What kind of new institutions can pop up depends on what kind of people are behind it, are making that. So that's really something I'm thinking about, how in the future, what kind of cases want to bring about. You know, there will be technology ones, there will be institutions we're going to try to bring out to say what kind of new things people may be making. So that's really where I was. Punya, you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, I loved Chris's thing about I used to think and now I think, and I sort of gave a sort of answer to that, not necessarily. But again, it's similar to what Zhao was asking about, like, how have I changed? And I'll be honest, I have actually become much more pessimistic about the human race than I was before. And I'm a very inherently optimistic fellow. It's very hard to get me to be pessimistic. But, and honestly, a deep sense of the failure of our field. If I look at misinformation, if I look at fake news, if I look at the way people can be manipulated, and you know, whether around vaccines or around COVID, or you know, we are just with our head in our sand completely around climate change. there are many significant challenges coming up. I mean, we have some amazing successes. I mean, this vaccine. I mean, if you think about, like, without being able to travel, without being able to, the scientists across the world could get together. So we have had some amazing successes. But as a species, I do see tribalism on the rise. I see, pseudoscience on the rise. I see politicians or other agents of, who should know better, taking positions which are, so I do see this as an indictment of our field as educators. And so, Zhao, I hear you completely when you say that, and that's been a change, I think, for me as well, which is really what is truly important in this conversation. And that's why I think some of the conversations that we have had, I think the last couple of people who have stepped up and tried to make institutional change, have tried to keep learners at the center, have asked questions of assumptions. I think that has become much more powerful in me, in my thinking, and that we need to be rethinking systems rather than tinkering at the margins. I mean, so that question that you asked, Kurt, I mean, yes, there are testimonials from people. Yes, I can point to projects that I did in Chicago and teachers that I've been in touch with where I felt like, yes, I've made a difference. But at some level, it is nothing compared to the scale of the challenge that we face. And I think that's something that we have to acknowledge. And those infighting within departments or the little petty things that happen within higher ed really pale in significance to the mountain of the task that we have ahead of us as a species, forget academia, as human beings. So I think that's something that, and honestly, I'm a little more pessimistic about things than I was before. I mean, that's just a fact.
Well, Punya, I have been actually generally pessimistic about human race. The human race is human race will destroy itself. That's for sure. Just may not be in our lifetime. It may take a while. I think that's the only chance. But individually, I'm also kind of happy to say, individuals can change themselves. That's another thing. It's very funny, as a group, as a race, the human race are not very smart as a collection. But individually, you look at individual students, they always find a way to get themselves out of something. That's another thing I'm amazed to say, I said, how can you do that? So that's also, the human innovation is also amazing at individual level. And so that's really actually fascinating to think about. I was just wondering, Shangye or Chris, you guys want to jump in?
Yeah, I can share that as I don't know whether just because I'm living in China, or this is the quite a kind of a successful country dealing with COVID-19. And so I think my life or my experience with you are totally different. That is, I'm very busy. I have even no time to rethink and to ponder on what is happening. That is, we just trapped in the house, or we just paused for 3 months, and then for the second half of the year, we just caught up every loss, the time loss, everything that we paused, and we even have this kind of accelerate all the progress. So we have been very, very busy in the last second half of the year. And I can see that as we don't have any very big, significant institutional change. We have a very big, gigantic or significant planning for the next 5 years. And so I think maybe this is what troubles me or make me think more. That is, I have no question that whether this world will be more split or separated. Yeah. So I think at least seems like we are living in a kind of a two worlds. Yeah. So this is my.
Yes, Chris.
Chris, give us an optimistic take.
Okay. It is easy to be pessimistic now. And I am, one of the things that's different for me now is I never believed that such a high percentage of people could be profoundly irrational and profoundly amoral, and it's scary. But we're not born that way. We're not born irrational and amoral and depressed. We're born curious and filled with a love of life and excitement. So the problem isn't the nature of people. The problem is the process that we put them through. And a lot of the blame has to fall on the educational system, because that's what educates out the curiosity and the joy and substitutes, I think what it substitutes is authority. So a lot of educational systems now are based on sitting people down and saying, this is the truth. Write it down, memorize it, give it back to me, go out and live your lives according to it. And a lot of the truth that they're given is inert knowledge. It's knowledge that doesn't really help you to live your life. 180 degrees in the angles of a triangle. Now, actually, if that's presented as active knowledge and it helps you to understand why a triangle is such a strong support and why an equilateral triangle is the strongest of the triangles, then it's useful, but it's not useful in the way that it's presented. It's presented as authority. And what I like about a lot of the innovations that we're hearing is that they're based, nobody has said this, but if you step back, they're based around inquiry and they're based around design. If students come out of school and no matter what they're told and who the authority is, they're capable of doing inquiry, looking directly at the evidence and deciding whether or not to believe the authority. That's a big help in terms of the irrationality. And the basing around design is to do what we've been talking about so far in this program. You see something in the world you don't like, and you're capable of imagining an alternative way of doing things that might work. So you try it, as opposed to not being capable of imagining anything different. So I think that the pessimism is justified, and I think that my own attempts to try to move education towards inquiry and design have had mixed results, as has everybody else's. But it's the right direction to go in. And I do think that innately we should be optimistic about people. It's what the processes we put them through that make me pessimistic.
Chris, I was reading an article by David Cohen and some other person from Meta, from Harvard, about about education reforms. Do you know Zhao Mehta?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So it's about reforms that succeed. But then I did not completely agree with their list of what made successful reforms. I was more interested in thinking about, we had two big wars. The first one, the second one, people were guessing will the third one come or will it not. I was just wondering, like education since 1945, the end of World War II, we should have learned better about how to deal with human relationships. We've been arguing, and also, people have been arguing against the mechanical way of treating students since, I don't know, 1800s, actually, since, all these things. The big reforms in terms touching the core have not really succeeded, but we have a lot of on the peripheral. You have the, Montessori's. By the way, I don't believe all Montessori schools are good Montessori schools. And they're, the Waldorf school just have a name doesn't catch it. But there are some other democratic schools, other things, but they're on the peripheral. So my view is this: I'm going to actually ask each one of you to give us some kind of assessment. Do you think COVID-19 is going to actually bring people toward more of this fringe, more child-centered education? We can start with Punya. What do you think?
Short
No
answer is, I think there's going to be more of a split, like I said before. I think there are going to be more of these experiments that will happen. But fundamentally, I think the systems are very strong, and people will want to get back to quote unquote the normal that they were used to after this disruption. So I am not optimistic in that sense that we will see significant change. What we will see bigger universities get bigger, we'll see online get bigger and so on, but I don't think it'll fundamentally change the way we have been thinking about teaching and learning, which is, the point that Chris, you made, which I love, right? Which is absolutely right. I mean, children are born into we are learning animals. We are in this world. This is what inspires us. Gives us joy, gives us passion, gives us energy to look at the world, to ask questions of it, to build things, to add to what we do in terms of its characters, the aesthetic value. I mean, these are deeply human things. These are some of the traits which have brought us to being sort of we are in the age of the Anthropocene, where we are the rulers of this planet, whether we like it or not. I mean, our decisions have impact. I mean, we had these wonderful episodes from these researchers working in Antarctica and so on. I mean, our impact is huge. But I think that the status quo is so strong, and the urge to go back to that will be very strong. So we will see changes, but not significant ones.
Let me add one more element to that. You know that the middle class, upper middle class, they're wealthy and rich. They're already aiming at high. Some people are arguing like the so-called 21st century skills is basically a new way to divide lower class and upper class. So if the so-called upper class are driven by the child-centered, not buying side doors into universities, so will the upper class have a different education, then continue to drive their lives better, and then the poor people, knowing they can't access to all these fancy things, then they have to be stuck with testing with the schools. And I'm going to go to Kurt, since we're just think about that issues, but feel free to jump in if you want to answer.
I just want to add one thing. I think that has always been the case. I think like if you look at educational technology, how it is used, over time, it's always been that in the more resource schools, technology has been used for more creative purposes, has been used for design and all that good stuff. And in other places, you have the drill and kill kinds of software, which get marketed to them and so on. And I think that divide has always been there. And this comes back to a point I think I made right at the beginning, which is that crises of this nature take existing schisms and make them worse. So I think we will see that schism grow even more.
All right, thanks, Punya. Kurt?
Yeah, I agree with Punya. It's economic, it's educational, political, and whatnot. Earlier, actually about 10 minutes ago, I was going to address this very point, and John just put something up here in, the problem is the incentive structures in academia are not geared, for much to happen. What's been most disappointing to me, I think, during COVID has been the journals publishing. If I read another special issue on COVID, I think I'll throw up. Because everyone's in the publisher perish mode, and so they've got an opportunity to publish an article about this little issue related to COVID, and it gets published, and it's not going to make a major dent in the world. We see, literally thousands and thousands of pretty much the same thing getting out in the same journals. I know one journal had a special issue called, I don't know if it was Journal of Computing and Education. One of the journals, two of them actually, they had 200 articles submitted, and I think they came out with a special addendum, packet of 150 articles in addition to the 10 that was published in the special issue. And I'm just going to pull my hair out. And each publication is meaningful in its own right, but it's not they're not doing what we need in terms of changing the models, the infrastructure, and understandings of educational innovation and where schooling and higher education needs to proceed, or they're not thinking about the systemic issues. It's all the micro issues so people can get published and they can get tenure. And so the incentive structures are all out of whack. For this crisis, there hasn't been people attentive to the incentive structures that exist out there for people who want to make significant progress or make a significant impact, or have a meaningful long-term collaboration with other partners out there. At least that I'm seeing that. Maybe Chris is working with the Gates Foundation or working with someone else who's been taking a lead role and have a more macro outlook of all this. But I have not seen it, and I've been totally disappointed in that. And there are literally there's over 100 journals in the ed tech field, and there isn't one of them that's impressed me, in looking at what's being published out there. Again, we need to have make a dent in doing research within the field as a whole. But in these times, at this moment in time, it's not appropriate what's getting out, what's getting published, in my opinion.
Shuangye, let's see.
Yeah, I'm very skeptical about this children-centered education. Why? That is because when we said this, they're still in a kind of adult-controlled discourse. That is because now I'm engaged in some national curriculum design, so I can see whenever we use this children-centered discourse, are our adults as teachers or professors were really, do we really understand our children? Just a very short example that we have a kind of experiment on this kind of a picture selection for picture prompt writing in grade 2 children in China. We just have one class, around 30 students. So when we give them the choice, what kind of picture you would like to choose to them and to their teachers, we can see there at least half of them are totally different. And teachers would never use the picture selected or chosen by the children. So I just use this small case. I can see this, I have this kind of question. Yeah.
Chris, you have the last word before I introduce our next episode.
So I like disruption. My late colleague, Clay Christensen, would talk about disruption. If you think about our many Silver Lining for Learning episodes, few of them have been successful evolutions of the current system. More, but not many, have been transformations of the current system. So Rovi last week talked about coming in and transforming continuing education within the university, but those are rare. Most of them have been disruptive. It's been setting up something new outside of the current system and letting people vote with their feet, and they vote in, and the current system collapses because nobody's coming anymore. So to me, one of the many silver linings for learning, I still love the title we gave this, is that the COVID has helped us to see that the emperor has no clothes.
Hey, Chris, you came up with that title, if you remember. Just I'm going to give you credit because you were the one who said it, and we all readily agreed. So,
okay,
I agree with you. Still, I think it's great. Keep going. I'm sorry.
But the emperor has no clothes. Parents are seeing what actually is happening in schools. College students are seeing when you take away all the trappings of the campus and the distractions, the weak kinds of pedagogies that many faculty use, and the disconnection of what they're learning from what's really important in life. Now, that doesn't guarantee anything other than that people may jump to disruptive things that are as bad or worse. We have to have the new models that actually are better. But I think Silver Lining for Learning is showing us that there are a lot of promising new models out there, and maybe we just need to think about how to foster disruption more than evolution or transformation.
Well, thank you very much. The There's a lot I would like to say about child-centered new education, new possibilities, but we are running out of time. So next week, actually, we have someone who is going to talk to us about that. It's Stephen Harris, who is now the director of learning at Learn Life in Barcelona, Spain. But he's from Australia. He used to be a school principal in Northern Sydney. He's done a lot of innovative things. And one of the things that in Barcelona they're trying to do is build a new community with young children and older adults. That's the kind of society we will need to deal with. Young children, remember, children always learn to be with themselves. Now, what about you work with other adults? I think Rovi last week mentioned that as well. We have a cross-age grouping. So we're going to have Stephen Harris next week to chat about that, about it's a new institution, new innovations, new systems, new players, and they are trying to spread the model across the globe. It's fascinating to read you can read the blog I just posted, and thank you for listening. We'll be back.